If you had walked through the streets of ancient Galilee, you probably wouldn't have noticed her. She wasn't standing in front of crowds. She wasn't teaching in the synagogues. She wasn't someone people were writing stories about, at least not yet. She was just one woman, in one corner of the world, in a place that most people would have passed by, without a second thought. And yet somehow, her name would outlive empires. Not because she chased importance, not because she held power, not because the world expected anything from her, but because when one of the most important moments in history arrived, she was there. Her name was Mary, Mary of Magdala. And her story doesn't begin in strength. It begins in suffering, in the kind of pain that changes the way a person sees everything, the kind of pain that makes life feel smaller, darker, harder to carry. But that wasn't the end of her story, because the woman who first appears in Scripture as someone deeply troubled would one day become one of the closest followers of Jesus and the first witness to the risen Christ. So, if you've ever wondered whether quiet faithfulness matters, if you've ever wondered whether someone with a broken beginning can still be part of something beautiful, Mary Magdalene's story is worth listening to. Her name was Mary, from a town called Magdala. Now Magdala wasn't some famous place. It was a fishing town near the Sea of Galilee, busy, ordinary, the kind of place where life just keeps moving, whether you're okay or not. And that part matters, because when we meet Mary in the story, she's not standing out, she's struggling, and not the kind of struggling people can easily point at and say, "Oh yeah, I know what that is." Luke gives us one line, just one. He says Mary was someone from whom 7 demons had come out. And that's it. No explanation, no backstory, no details, which honestly makes it heavier. Because now you have to imagine it. What does that kind of suffering feel like? What does a normal day even look like? Maybe it meant feeling like your own mind wasn't quiet. Maybe it meant not being able to explain what was wrong, even if you tried. Maybe it meant people looking at you, but not really understanding you. And here's the thing. When people don't understand something, they usually fill in the blanks themselves. And those guesses, they stick. That's actually why, later on, people started attaching stories to Mary that the Bible never even says. But if you stay with what's actually written, her story is very clear. She was suffering, and Jesus changed that. That's it. And honestly, that's enough. Because before she was known for anything important, she was just someone who needed help. And if that had been the whole story, we wouldn't be talking about her right now. But something happened that changed everything. And this is where everything shifts. Because at some point, Mary meets Jesus. Now here's what's interesting. The Bible doesn't give us a full scene here. No long conversation, no dramatic build-up, no detailed moment. Just this: Jesus healed her. That's it. And in a way, that almost feels too simple. But maybe that's the point. Because not every life-changing moment looks dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just the moment where something that used to control your life doesn't anymore. Whatever Mary had been carrying, it was gone. And you can imagine what that feels like finally being able to breathe again, like your life suddenly has space in it, where there wasn't before. And when something like that happens, you don't just move on, you remember. That's why people followed Jesus for different reasons. Some were curious, some were amazed, some were just trying to figure him out. But Mary? She followed because something real had already happened to her. And that changes the way you follow. It's not curiosity anymore. It's something deeper. I've experienced this, so I'm staying. And if you look at what happens next, that's exactly what she does. She stays. From that moment on, Mary didn't go back. She stayed close. And if you imagine what that actually looked like, it wasn't always dramatic. It wasn't constant miracles. It wasn't non-stop crowds. A lot of it was just walking, long roads, stretching between towns, dust rising with every step, conversations happening in pieces, sometimes understood, sometimes not. And Mary was there for all of it, not in front, not trying to stand out, just present, watching how Jesus spoke to people, watching how he treated the ones everyone else ignored, watching the way crowds gathered and then slowly dispersed again. And somewhere in those ordinary moments, something deeper was happening. Because following Jesus wasn't just about what you saw. It was about what changed in you, over time. Luke tells us that Mary was among the women who supported the ministry, and that might sound like a small detail, but it's not, because that means she didn't just receive something from this story. She became part of it. She gave her time, her presence, what she had. And that's how you know this wasn't just a moment for her. This was a direction. Day after day, step after step. Mary stayed. And most people don't notice this part, because it's quiet. But quiet faithfulness is where real change happens. But over time, things began to shift. At first it felt hopeful. Crowds gathered quickly. People were curious. There was energy, movement, expectation. But slowly, something changed. You can almost feel it if you sit in the story long enough. The questions people ask start sounding different. Not curious anymore, but careful, watching, testing. Religious leaders begin showing up more often, standing at the edges, listening, but not really listening. And conversations that once felt open start to feel tense. And if you were walking with Jesus during that time, you would notice it. Mary would have noticed it. Maybe in the way people looked at him. Maybe in the silence after certain things he said. Maybe in the way the mood shifted, even when nothing obvious happened. And now, following him wasn't just about learning anymore. It was about choosing to stay, even when something didn't feel safe. Because at some point, you realize this path is going somewhere, and not everyone is going to follow it all the way. Some people begin to step back, quietly, gradually, less present, less certain, and moments like that reveal something. Because it's easy to stay when everything feels light. But when things start getting heavier, that's when you see who is still there. And Mary was still there. And then everything changes. One moment, things are still moving forward. People are still talking. There's still a sense of direction. And then suddenly, he's taken. Jesus is arrested. And when something like that happens, it doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel organized. It feels chaotic, like the story you were standing in just shifted underneath your feet. And no one explains it. No one pauses everything to say, here's what's happening. It just happens. And people react. Some step back immediately, some stay, but at a distance. Some don't know where to stand or what to do. Because just hours ago, everything felt normal. There were conversations. There were people around him. There was still movement, still life, still direction. And now, everything feels uncertain. And this is the moment where fear becomes real. Because now, it's not just confusing, it's risky. Following him now feels different. He's not just being questioned, he's being taken away. And when fear enters like that, it changes how people move. You can almost picture it, people looking around, lowering their voices, taking a step back without saying anything. And in moments like that, something is revealed. Because when things feel safe, a lot of people stay. But when fear shows up, some leave quietly, some create distance, some convince themselves it's better not to be too close anymore. And still, Mary is there, not speaking, not stepping forward, but not walking away either. And sometimes, That moment right there tells you everything about a person. Not when things are clear, but when they're not. And then there's a trial. But it doesn't feel like a trial. It doesn't feel like people are trying to understand anything. It feels like something has already been decided, and everything else is just happening around it. Voices rise, accusations are thrown out. And if you were there, you wouldn't feel clarity. You would feel confusion. Because just days ago, people were listening to him, following him. And now, everything has turned. The same energy that once felt hopeful now feels unstable, uncertain, like something is slipping, and no one can stop it. And moments like this are hard, because your mind keeps trying to catch up. You keep thinking, maybe this will change. Maybe something will interrupt this. Maybe this isn't really going where it looks like it's going. But it is. And slowly, you begin to realize something. This isn't just tension anymore. This is the moment where everything starts to fall apart. Not all at once, but in a way you can feel, like something that was holding everything together is no longer holding. And that realization is quiet, but heavy, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And Mary is still there. Not because she understands it, not because she has answers, but because leaving now would mean turning away from everything she's lived through. And she doesn't. And then, he's on the cross. And this is where everything slows down. Because now, there's no more wondering what's happening. There's no more trying to interpret events. This is it. This is the moment. And it's heavy. Not just because of what's happening, but because of what it means. Because now, everything that felt like it was building toward something looks like it's ending. Right here. And when you're standing in a moment like that, time feels different. It doesn't move normally. It stretches. Every second feels longer than it should, and people respond in different ways. Some can't look, some step back, some leave completely, because staying means feeling it, and feeling it is painful. But Mary stays. And this is important, because she's not staying because she can fix anything. She's not staying because she has control. She's staying even though she doesn't. She stays close enough to see it, close enough to witness it, close enough to not turn away. And there's something about that matters, because there is a kind of love that shows up when everything is good, when things feel hopeful, when things feel clear. But there is another kind of love that shows up here, in the hardest moment, when everything is breaking, when nothing makes sense, when there's nothing left to hold on to. And that kind of love doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't try to fix things. It just stays. And sometimes, that's the strongest thing a person can do. And then, it's over. Not in a way that feels complete, but in a way that leaves everything unresolved. The movement stops. The voices that once filled the streets are gone. The energy that carried everything forward disappears. And what's left is quiet. Not a peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that feels unfamiliar, heavy, almost disorienting. Because when something ends that suddenly your mind doesn't catch up right away, you go over it again and again, trying to understand what just happened, even when there aren't clear answers. And for Mary, this isn't just grief in general. It's personal, because the one who changed her life, the one she followed through all those days, is gone. And everything that once felt like it was leading somewhere now feels uncertain. That's the part people don't always talk about. What comes after the moment, when there's nothing to do, nothing to fix, just time, and the weight of what happened. And in moments like that, a lot of people quietly step away. Not because they don't care, but because staying in that kind of silence is difficult. But Mary doesn't disappear from the story. Even here, even when there's no clarity, she remains. So, early in the morning, Mary goes back. Not because she expects anything to change, and not because she suddenly understands everything. She goes back because something in her tells her to return. Because when something matters deeply, you don't just walk away from it. Even if all you're carrying with you is grief, you still show up. And you can imagine that walk. Quiet, steady, with thoughts that don't quite settle. There's no urgency, no dramatic rush, just movement, one step at a time, towards something she's not sure how to face yet. And when she arrives, the first thing she notices is that something is different. The stone is no longer in place. And for a moment, she pauses. Because this isn't what she expected. This isn't what she came for. And now, instead of clarity, there's confusion again. Not loud or overwhelming, but the kind that makes you stand still a little longer, trying to understand what you're seeing, because something has clearly changed. But she doesn't know what it means yet. And then, in that moment of uncertainty, something shifts. Not all at once. Not in a way that announces itself, but quietly. Something changes. Jesus speaks. Not with a long explanation, not with something meant to convince anyone. Just her name, Mary. And there's something about that moment that's hard to explain, because nothing around her suddenly becomes louder. Nothing dramatic happens in the background. But internally, everything rearranges. Because recognition isn't just about seeing, it's about knowing. And in that instant, she knows. The one she thought she had lost, the one she watched suffer, the one she stayed with until the end, is standing right in front of her, alive. And that realization doesn't rush. It settles, slowly, but completely. The grief she was carrying doesn't disappear instantly, but it changes shape. Because what felt like an ending is no longer the end. And you can imagine what that feels like. That moment where something you thought was final suddenly isn't. Where everything you had started to accept has to be seen differently now. And she's standing there, in that realization. Not as someone powerful, not as someone chosen by the world, but as herself, Mary. The same person whose story began in suffering, who followed quietly, who stayed when things became difficult, who remained even when everything fell apart, is now standing in the moment that changes everything. And she didn't get there by force. She didn't get there by status. She got there because she stayed. Mary didn't become unforgettable because she stood out. She became unforgettable because she stayed. She stayed when things were ordinary, when the days didn't feel important, when nothing dramatic was happening. She stayed when things became uncertain, when the tone shifted, when following became harder to explain. And she stayed when everything seemed to fall apart, when the story no longer made sense, when most people didn't know what to do next. And because of that, when the moment came, she was there. Not because she planned it, not because she knew how it would end, but because she didn't walk away. And maybe that's what her story leaves us with. Not a message about being the strongest, or the most visible, or the most important person in the room, but something quieter. That staying matters. That showing up, even when things are unclear, matters. That remaining, even when it would be easier to step back, matters. Because sometimes, the people who quietly stay are the ones who find themselves standing in the moments that change everything.